Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Cameron English here with you, Director of Biosciences at the American Council on Science and Health, joined again by my intrepid colleague, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, our Director of Medicine. Chuck, what's going on? How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Hey, before we get into our stories, I had a random question for you. I started rewatching my favorite medical show, Scrubs, again, and the running theme on that show is that, well, one of them is that surgeons and internists don't like psychiatrists. They think they're fake doctors. I'm wondering, is there any truth to that in the real world? Is there sort of a rivalry between these disciplines?
There's definitely a rivalry between the disciplines. There's a pecking order or a food chain, depending on which way you look at it. And everybody will tell you that their specialty is at the top of the food chain, though. And the reality is that the surgeons are, as anybody knows. But I've actually seen more competitive feelings between the surgeons and the internists that do interventions, particularly the cardiologists. There's a lot of give and take between those two groups about who actually has the most important organ to be treating, and therefore is the most important person.
Oh, that's funny, man. Because in the show, there's multiple scenes where you'll see an internist talking to a psychiatrist and going, "Oh, I can't imagine going into a fake specialty after medical school. What led you to that decision?"
Well, it's funny to tell the truth. When I went to medical school, I planned on being a psychiatrist. That was my original plan. But as my wife would point out, luckily I didn't do that because we would be living over somebody's garage, living hand to mouth, because I just have no ability as a psychiatrist. But the thing that I found most fascinating is mid-life career changes. The most common change is between psychiatry and surgery and psychiatry.
Really?
Yeah, not really two specialties that you would think on the surface had a lot in common, but actually they really do in a number of ways. Not so much in terms of that hands-on active part, but there are other qualities about being a surgeon or a psychiatrist that are very similar.
Well, maybe one day we can have a conversation about that. I would just love to know how you get tired of slicing people up and instead you want to fix their brains. So maybe we'll have to talk about that sometime. But in any case, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, we can always talk about it on Monday.
All right. Well, we've got two stories to talk about. Neither of them have to do with surgery or psychiatry. Not really, anyway. So this first one Chuck wrote, it's called One Toke Over the Median, Driving Stoned. We've got some new data coming in on how marijuana legalization has impacted automobile accidents. We're going to dive into that. And then I wrote a story late last week called Climate Anxious College Students Troubled by Pesticides Need a Science Lesson. So you can tell that's going to be a very gentle one. But Chuck, let's start with this first story you wrote. Tell us about this. Do we have anything to be concerned about here?
Well, it's unclear. That's going to be the bottom line to the story. The study looked at Western states where they had legalized recreational marijuana, not medicinal marijuana. So it was open to a larger public. Now, there is no test that can be done at the point that you're stopped by a policeman to see whether you're under the influence of marijuana. That makes it much more difficult to determine who's driving under the influence. So there are a lot of other kind of cognitive tests that people have used to look at it. So you can put that grain of salt in to begin with. But what the study looked at basically was whether there was an increase in the number of motor vehicle accidents in the state once marijuana legalization had taken place, with the assumption that all the other parameters of accidents would hold the same, meaning that they had a similar population of drunk drivers still driving on the roads, that there was not a large construction of roads that were more difficult to navigate, like rural roads that were don't have the street lights and so on and so forth. And what they showed was that in the states that had legalized marijuana compared to the control states in the West, there was about a 4 or a 5% increase in the number of injuries or fatal crashes over time. So they point to that to suggest that there's certainly the possibility that marijuana is a contributory factor in the rise in accidents. They found that there was also some variation in terms of this. Colorado led the way in terms of injury crashes by about 20% increase compared to their baseline or compared to the control group, and about a 1.5% increase in fatalities. California, which is a larger state, and they corrected everything to reflect population, only saw about a 6% increase in crash injuries. So I did in the article also refer back to a piece I had written back in December 2020 where they took people and got them high and put them in one of the little driver trainers. I don't know whether I'm aging myself by saying that's one of the little, cars that you use to learn how to go through your driver education class. And what they discovered was that even though, as the urban myth is true, that people drive slower and more carefully, whether to avoid being pulled over because that's the way their perceptions changed, they did have an increase in the amount of weaving of the car. They just didn't keep it straight in line once they were under the influence of a pot, and that lasted for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. So there's something to be said that buzz driving is bad driving. And, now that I'm sitting here in New York, and New York has now legalized recreational marijuana, there's a lot of PSAs that are talking about marijuana, saying that marijuana affects the way you listen to music. It affects the way you talk to your friends. It also affects how you drive. And they're just trying to get people to recognize that lighten up and then getting behind the wheel is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you think that's just sort of preparation on their part? They're trying to get out in front of any additional crashes that may occur? Or are they looking at data like this and saying, we might have a problem on our hands. We need to start warning people against smoking pot and then driving?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that they have no great enforcement mechanism because it's not like getting pulled over and being intoxicated from alcohol. There is no blood level of marijuana that they can get to determine that you're under the influence at the time. So I said there's a number of cognitive tests, very similar to, walking a straight line. They can ask you questions, but it's going to be very tough for them to take you into court and say, well, his eyes were bloodshot and he was going 20 and a 30, So I think that they're doing the best that they can to minimize the number of people that decide to drive and smoke. Though I would think in a state like New York, where weed has not been legalized, but it has not been a crime that the police would arrest you for in the last 10 or 12 years, that they were not going to see a significant change because most people that would be taking advantage of legalized marijuana have been taking advantage of illegal marijuana for many years. I mean, I can remember back when I was an intern in the Bronx, and they would bring people in, and they would find, the cops would bring them in because they needed something sewn up, and they would find, joints on them. They just throw them away. It just wasn't worth booking them over that. They had bigger prey to worry about.
Yeah, I can imagine in a giant city like that. So looking at these numbers, can we say anything with any confidence? Because, and this is not the fault of the researchers, but as you alluded to, there's so many variables that could affect someone's driving behavior. Obviously, marijuana would be one of them, but, you talked about, speed limits. You talked about the age of the drivers. You talked about, appropriate lighting along the road in rural parts of the country and so forth. And it just goes on and on. Maybe someone got in a fight with their spouse the day that they got in a car wreck, and they also happened to smoke some weed. How do you disentangle those effects in order to understand this? So talk about that. How do we know this with confidence if we do?
Well, it's what they call a difference in different studies. So the numbers are reliable. The interpretation of them is where the ambiguity comes in. So I would think to say that there's certainly a signal in there that legalizing marijuana may result in increased motor vehicle problems. The other piece that you need to add into this is the increasing potency of the products that are now available. And I think that any number of articles in the last month or two on the website have really been looking at the fact that today's legalized marijuana is not the stuff that we were token 30 years ago. It has all the benefits now of culture and farming. It hasn't had CRISPR applied to it yet. And so we don't have to worry about any GMO pot. It's still natural. But the people that are the commercial enterprises that are doing this are cranking up the THC in the product, and they're doing what they can to deliver a more potent product at a lower price point. It's a market kind of thing. So I think that there's a signal there. We need to pay attention to the signal and see what happens. But I wouldn't take the absolute numbers and say, oh yeah, that's absolutely going on. We have yet to prove that.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And out here in California, pot's been legal for a while. And not only have they made it more potent, but they've put it in everything. I don't partake myself, not a fan, doesn't agree with me. But I have friends who use breakfast syrup that has THC in it, and of course gummy bears, and even drink flavorings. They put it in everything. So I don't even know how you would track this. I mean, as you said, the stuff that maybe you and your friends would smoke at a Grateful Dead concert, that's gone. That's lost to history. This stuff now is way stronger. So I don't even know how you would monitor that, frankly.
I don't think that there is a way. I think this is one of those times. The legalization is going to move forward no matter what. It's a revenue source to the states that are looking for a revenue. It's a sin tax, so they're going to like that. And they got it's an interesting economic marketplace. Again, there was an ad this week. Ice-T, former rapper, now TV star on on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, is opening up a dispensary with an ex-playmate model in Jersey City. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Snoop Dogg, who's doing those commercials now with Martha Stewart, is huge into this business. He has millions and millions of dollars from the legalized marijuana business.
I just love the world we live in, Chuck. What a fascinating time to be alive.
Oh yeah.
Parenthetically, I was dishing out some Cheerios to my young son today, and you'll never guess who was hyping the heart health benefits of Cheerios on the back of the box. Ice-T.
There we see. He's everywhere, bringing health to us all.
You got pain relief. You got whole grains for heart health, and I don't know what else he's selling. He's
bring
trying
that cholesterol down, baby.
All right. Well, there you go, folks. We don't know too much yet. We have some data coming in, but it's just going to take time. And with that, let's talk, Chuck, a little bit about climate anxious college students. I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently someone is diagnosing people with climate anxiety, which is a fear of impending doom caused by climate disaster. This is apparently a real, I don't know if it's technically a diagnosis. I don't think you'll find it in the DSM, but this seems to be a thing for some people. And this was a story, I believe it was, it's a paper that is under U.S. News and World Report. And they're talking about college students around the country who are just mortified by a climate change disaster coming. And the way that they're dealing with the stress that that induces is they're pulling weeds around campus and they're protesting the use of synthetic pesticides at their schools. And this is, what exactly the impact of this is supposed to be, I'm not sure. Apparently, it just makes them feel good. But the issue that concerned me is that they're protesting a technology that's actually quite useful. And if you want to look at it in terms of climate benefits, they're enormous. There's just no doubt about this. The research is pretty clear, because when farmers can use synthetic herbicides, for example, of course, glyphosate is the big one everyone's familiar with, but atrazine would be another example. When you can use these kinds of chemicals, you can control your weeds very effectively if you're a farmer, but then you don't have to till your field nearly as much, or maybe at all even, which allows you to keep more carbon in the soil. And then it reduces your fuel use. And of course, everybody knows that fossil fuels emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So on balance, this is a really good development. And there was one study from a couple of years ago, they found that this particular benefit of keeping carbon out of the atmosphere from synthetic herbicides, it was the equivalent of keeping like 15 million cars off the road for the period of time that this was in effect. So it's an enormous benefit. So that was my first concern about this article, the framing from the author, and then from the concerns of the students. It's just strange to me that they would protest such an enormously helpful technology. What were your thoughts on this when you read it?
No, it's odd because I came at it from a completely different point of view. So climate anxiety, I can kind of get my head around that. I mean, I'm old. I'm not going to be here when it's 100 and, when it's 2 degrees warmer. I'm not going to be here to find out. So I can empathize a little bit with people that have that concern. But a lot of what I read in that article was more virtue signaling than actually anything useful. That it's nice that she goes out and helps pick the weeds with the grounds crew. Okay, that's fine. That shows some compassion, I suppose, in some level. But if she sat down with somebody that was interested in the ecology of the area, you might start asking some questions about why they have all that lawn to begin with, and why they're busy watering all that lawn, because that's not natural at all. That's done by the school in order to make the school look more attractive to the students to come and go there. I mean, if you're really interested in mitigating climate problems, then you should think more about having a landscape to your school that's consistent with the landscape that's around you. You think about I think about UCLA and all the lawns that were watered in UCLA. Los Angeles is a very dry area. It doesn't need lawns in that sense. So I thought it's kind of that classic thing that we all do when we're in school and wanting to protest, which is to do some small act that does more to make us feel good than it does to contribute to solving the problem. But more importantly, it suggests that we really don't understand the underlying problem at all. Stopping the use of pesticides and pulling your own weeds at Brandeis is not going to change anything. And so I was more taken by that than the fact that they'd already bought into the other tropes about natural is good, synthetic is bad, and all the rest.
Yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down. But to your point, I agree with it. I think there's definitely some validity there. And I don't know if I'm being too cynical here, but I almost want to say they're not really that concerned about climate change if they don't know these facts about how agriculture either contributes to or reduces CO2 emissions. Because it's one thing if you're a climatologist and you know the data really well and you say, look, this is a problem. Here's the results we have. projecting 50 years down the road, this is what we might consider doing. And then that's the classic argument that everybody wants to have. But if you're wrapped up in anxiety around this issue, I would suspect, and maybe I'm wrong here, I would suspect you would look into it a little more deeply if you really care about it. But I think, as you said, this is more of a virtue signal. This is me showing everyone around me how righteous I am and how I'm working for this cause. And the underlying facts don't really matter. And that was the whole other aspect of the story that was fascinating, that someone at U.S. News and World Report thought that this was newsworthy, that you have. Yes. And I said entitled college students, and I had one reader take me to task for that. But I was like, well, look, there's people around the world that pick weeds all day. That's all they do. They're young children. They don't get to go to Brandeis or UC Berkeley. They get to pull weeds so they have enough food at the end of the season to eat. And it's backbreaking labor. A lot of them have a lot of medical complications from bending over in the hot sun for hours at a time. So I just have a hard time sympathizing with people who are just, they're fainting on their couches because they have finals coming up and this is how they deal with the stress. There's a disconnect there, and I just have trouble taking it seriously.
And I hear you, but I feel guilty because of my boomer youth, and any of the number of ways that I protested during that period of time with what I thought was a reasonable degree of knowledge, which, as it turns out, was just a superficial understanding. And I mean, in truth be told, from my point of view, the importance of college is going from being 18 to being 22 and having a chance to grow up and learn a little bit about life outside of the shelter of high school and home. And so I don't mind. I don't feel bad that she's off doing that. But as an older person and as an old boomer now, I guess, come on, this. You're not getting to the depth of the problem. But then, as I said, I have that empathy because I think back on all the many causes that I was very righteous about at 22 that I still hold are correct, but I have a much better understanding of how it fits into a much larger scheme of things and how it ain't going to change just because I wanted it to, or I pulled some weeds.
Right. I'm sort of picturing Chuck now as an extra in Forrest Gump.
I'll tell you, Washington. It's funny that you say that because I sometimes feel that there are moments in my life that were Forrest Gump moments because I'll just leave you with one thought. So this is 71-ish. And I'm at UCLA as an undergraduate and involved in politics. And there's a guy that's going to come and talk to us about the war. And we wound up going out to Malibu and sitting around. And we're around a campfire at Malibu at 7 o'clock in the evening. A bunch of us listening to this guy talk about the number counts and all the other problems about Vietnam. And the interesting thing was the next week he published the Pentagon Papers. So in some way, I feel I had those kind of Forrest Gump moments throughout my life.
That's a great story. And it makes that movie more interesting because there's some scenes in that movie, he's at the Watergate Hotel and he calls the front desk. He's like, there's people in the office over there with flashlights and I can't sleep.
Yes.
That kind of stuff happens, I suppose. But in any case, yeah, there you go, folks. That's just the takeaway I would put on this is that technology as a rule, there are exceptions. Technology as a rule makes our society more sustainable. We have a civilization. It's not going to go away anytime soon unless something catastrophic happens. And one of the ways we prevent that is by employing technologies like synthetic pesticides. And they get lots of hate. The media loves to pile on because corporations make yucky chemicals and so forth. But these are how we feed ourselves, feed people around the world, raise the standard of living. This is how it starts. And so I think that's something important to be aware of.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks, Chuck. See, Chuck and I agree. So our consensus here is that pesticides have important uses. So there you go, everybody. We're going to leave it there for the week. If you want to get these stories that we talk about, you can go to our website. It's acsh.org. There's a little button at the top that says subscribe. Click on that, punch in your email, and several times a week, we will send you the stories that we publish throughout the week. And then you can read them. And the most popular ones we look at, and then we talk about on this show. So if you want to be a little more informed before you show up, get on that email list. And we'll be back next week with a whole nother batch of stories. Chuck, as always, thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. I hope you have a lovely weekend, my friend.
You too. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
See you later.